Have you ever asked yourself, when will my life actually begin? I sure have, and I still do to a certain extent. And that's probably why Tangled hit me harder than I expected on my latest rewatch. Because underneath the humor, the romance, and some of Disney's best songs, Tangled is a story about people who don't feel free to be who they really are. Rapunzel has spent her entire life trapped in a tower, with Mother Gothel constantly convincing her that the outside world is dangerous and that she can't make decisions for herself. Gothel herself is obsessed with maintaining her youth and the identity she's built around it, willing to manipulate Rapunzel to keep it, and Flynn Rider hides behind a completely different identity, using the persona of Flynn Rider to protect himself from the rejection and abandonment he experienced growing up as an orphan. And what makes all of this even more effective is the soundtrack. Songs like When Will My Life Begin, Mother Knows Best, I've Got a Dream, and I See the Light aren't just catchy Disney songs. They reveal what these characters want, what they're afraid of, and how they're changing throughout the story. That's what I want to explore in this video, the psychology of Tangled and how this seemingly simple Disney fairy tale became a story about control, identity, fear, and ultimately learning to become who you're meant to be. The character I connect with most in Tangled is, without a doubt, Rapunzel, and I think the reason is pretty simple. I've had my own version of her tower. For most of my life, I could look at my situation from the outside and think, what's really wrong? I had a roof over my head, I had food, I had things to do. Nothing was necessarily falling apart, and yet I still felt like I was waiting for my life to begin. And that's exactly what the song When Will My Life Begin captures so well. On the surface, it's this fun, upbeat song about a girl who's bored with her routine, but underneath it, there's something much sadder. Rapunzel has spent 18 years doing the same things every day, dreaming about what exists beyond the tower, and wondering when she's finally going to get to experience it. And I've asked myself that same question. The difference is that for a long time, I didn't really do anything about it. I was stuck in my own routine, waiting for something to change without actually making the change myself. I also understand what it's like to listen to one person's opinion for so long that you stop questioning whether it's actually your own, to believe what they tell you because you trust them. And when you finally do something that feels like you're going against them, you feel guilty for it. That's what makes Rapunzel's situation so interesting to me. She's not physically chained to the tower. She has a bed, food, books, paints, music, and everything she could possibly need to survive. From the outside, her life might even look pretty comfortable, but it's not her life. It's a life that someone else has decided for her. And that's the real power of Gothel's control. She doesn't just lock Rapunzel inside a tower, she teaches Rapunzel to believe that leaving it would be a mistake. Eventually, Rapunzel doesn't need Gothel standing over her every second. The fear, guilt, and doubt have already become part of her own thinking. And I think that's something Tangled understands incredibly well. You don't always need someone physically stopping you from leaving. Sometimes they've convinced you so thoroughly that you don't believe you're allowed to leave. And that's why Rapunzel's decision to finally step outside the tower means so much to me. She's excited, terrified, guilty, and hopeful all at the same time. She's not just leaving a building, she's finally beginning to make decisions for herself. And eventually, I had to make my own decision to leave my version of that tower. When I moved out of my parents' house and started living on my own, I finally started experiencing life differently. I started doing things for myself. I started meeting people, seeing the world differently, and realizing that a lot of the things I'd been taught to fear weren't actually as frightening as I'd been led to believe. For a long time, I had been convinced that the world was a terrible place, that you could really only trust your family, and that being vulnerable with other people was something to avoid. But the more time I've spent outside of that environment, the more I've realized that many of those fears weren't necessarily truths about the world. They were fears that had been passed on to me. And that's where I really connect with Rapunzel's journey. Leaving the tower doesn't suddenly make her confident. She's still carrying Gothel's voice with her. Every time she makes a decision for herself, there's that guilt telling her she's doing something wrong. But the more Rapunzel experiences the world for herself, the more she realizes that she can trust her own decisions. She doesn't become a completely different person. She finally starts becoming the person she was all along. And I think that's what makes her arc so satisfying. Freedom isn't just being allowed to leave the tower, it's learning to trust yourself once you're finally outside of it. But all of that becomes difficult when the person who has the most influence over you is constantly leading you in the opposite direction, and that's Mother Gothel. Gothel's relationship with Rapunzel is obviously manipulative. She lies to her, isolates her, belittles her, and uses guilt and fear to keep her dependent. But what's interesting to me is that I don't think Gothel necessarily sees herself as the villain. Her entire life revolves around Rapunzel. Her youth, her purpose, and eventually her identity are all tied to this one person. And that's where I think this movie taps into something that exists in the real world. There are parents who become so wrapped up in their children that they stop living for themselves. Their identity becomes their role as a parent, and sometimes, without even realizing it, they can start treating their child's independence as a threat to their own identity. Obviously, Tangled takes this to an extreme. Gothel literally steals a child and keeps her locked in a tower so she can preserve her youth. But underneath that exaggeration, I think there's something more interesting. Because Gothel may actually love Rapunzel in her own twisted way. She may genuinely care about her, but her love has become possessive. She doesn't want Rapunzel to become her own person because Rapunzel becoming independent means Gothel loses the person around whom she's built her entire life. And that's the difference between loving someone and needing to possess them. There's no better example of this than the song Mother Knows Best. At first, it's almost funny. Gothel is singing this over the top song about all the terrible things that could happen to Rapunzel if she ever leaves the tower. But underneath the humor, she's doing something much more calculated. She's taking Rapunzel's natural fear of the unknown and feeding it. She tells Rapunzel that she's too naive, too fragile, too inexperienced to survive without her. She points out everything that's supposedly wrong with her and everything that's supposedly dangerous about the outside world. And then she wraps all of that in the idea that she's doing it because she loves her. That's what makes the song so effective. Gothel doesn't have to convince Rapunzel that she's evil, she just has to convince her that she's protecting her. And because Rapunzel has heard this her entire life, she trusts it. That's why when Rapunzel finally decides to leave, the guilt hits her so hard. She's not just afraid of the outside world, she's afraid that wanting a life of her own makes her a bad daughter. And that's exactly what Gothel has taught her to believe. The tower may be the physical thing keeping Rapunzel trapped, but Gothel's voice is what keeps her there long after she starts wanting to leave. And what's interesting is that Rapunzel isn't the only person entangled who discovers that people aren't always who they appear to be. We see that in one of the movie's funniest scenes, I've Got a Dream. At first, it's just a ridiculous song about a bunch of intimidating criminals admitting their surprisingly wholesome dreams, but underneath the comedy, I think there's something meaningful here. Every person in that tavern is perceived a certain way. They're criminals, they're intimidating, and they're the kind of people you'd probably want to stay away from. But once they actually express what they want, we realize there's so much more to them than the assumptions we've made. And I think there's something important in that. We're so quick to decide who someone is based on what we see on the surface when we really have no idea what they're carrying on the inside. Sometimes, all it takes is one person being willing to express something vulnerable for everyone else to feel comfortable doing the same. That's exactly what happens here. Rapunzel is completely open about her dream, and suddenly, everyone else feels comfortable enough to admit theirs. And then there's Flynn. When it's his turn, he says his dream is to be alone on an island with a lot of money. But we all know that's not really his dream. Because Flynn Rider isn't really Flynn Rider. He's Eugene Fitzherbert, Flynn Rider is a persona he's created. He's confident, charming, successful, and seemingly doesn't care what anyone thinks of him, but underneath that is someone who's terrified of rejection. Even the movie makes a joke out of how carefully he's constructed this image. Remember the wanted posters where the artists keep getting his nose wrong? Flynn is genuinely bothered by it. It's funny, but it also tells us something about him. He's obsessed with how other people see him. And I think that says a lot about Eugene. If you've spent your life feeling like the real version of you isn't good enough, it's easier to create a version that you think people will accept. You can make yourself funny, confident, successful, or whatever you think people want you to be, because if people reject that persona, it doesn't hurt quite as much as letting them reject the real you. But that also makes it almost impossible to be vulnerable, and I understand that. I've spent a lot of my life being closed off because of the things I was taught and the environment I grew up in. I've been afraid to let people get too close, and that has made it harder for me to make new friends, build deeper connections, and even pursue relationships. You can protect yourself from rejection by never letting anyone get close enough to reject you. But the problem is, you also protect yourself from connection. And that's what makes Flynn's relationship with Rapunzel so important. Neither of them really knows how to be completely vulnerable at first. Rapunzel has been taught to be afraid of the world, while Eugene has spent years hiding behind Flynn Rider. But the longer they're together, the more those walls start coming down. And eventually, we get to one of my favorite moments in the entire movie: I see the light. By this point, Rapunzel has started to realize that the world isn't what Gothel told her it was. She can make her own decisions, she can trust herself, and Eugene is beginning to realize that he doesn't have to hide behind Flynn Rider to be worthy of being loved. They're both finally allowing someone else to see who they really are. And I think that's why the song means so much more to me than just being a beautiful Disney love song. The longer I've been away from the environment I grew up in, the more I've been able to see the world differently too. I've become more willing to trust people, to make my own decisions, and to let people actually know me. In a way, I've had my own version of I See the Light, and that's what I think makes this moment in Tangled so beautiful. Rapunzel and Eugene don't save each other by becoming different people, they help each other become comfortable enough to finally be themselves. I think that's what makes Tangled so much deeper than it initially appears. It's a funny movie, it's a beautiful movie, it's a great romance, it has an incredible soundtrack and some of Disney's most memorable characters. But underneath all of that, it's a story about identity, control, fear, vulnerability, and learning to trust yourself. And honestly, I didn't expect this movie to mean as much to me as it does. But after watching it again, I realized that Tangled has become one of my favorite Disney movies. Rapunzel spends her entire life wondering, when will my life begin? And maybe that's what makes her story so meaningful to me. Sometimes the hardest part isn't leaving the tower, it's realizing you're allowed to leave in the first place. And once you do, you finally get to see what's been waiting for you on the other side. If you made it this far and liked today's analysis of Tangled, please consider leaving a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more breakdowns of movies you love just like this, and comment down below if Tangled and any of its themes resonated with you. I'd love to know. And until next time, I'm the Wandering Took, and thanks for watching.